I will not marry you. The words left my mouth before I could stop them. Loud, sharp, and far too reckless for a throne room ruled by a man like him. The ruthless Alpha King didn't flinch. He didn't growl. He just looked at me, slow and cold, the way a predator studies something it hadn't planned to chase, but suddenly wants. The guards moved towards me. Every elder stepped back. Everyone knew what he did to those who challenged him. Everyone but me waited for violence. But he took one step toward me instead, quiet, deliberate, and in that moment, I realized refusing him might be the last mistake I ever make. Welcome back to the channel. If you're enjoying the story so far, leave a comment to let me know where you are watching from, and make sure to like the video and subscribe, so you never miss a new episode. Chapter 1, The Locked Wing. His boots made no sound on the stone floor. That was the first thing that terrified me. A man that size should announce himself with every step, but Alpha King Channon moved like smoke, like something that had learned long ago how to slip into spaces it wasn't invited. The throne room stretched behind him, all dark wood and iron sconces that threw shadows long enough to swallow a person whole. Outside the tall windows, the sky was bruising into dusk, purple-black clouds pressing down on the palace like a hand over a mouth. I could smell the rain coming. Wet stone and ozone, sharp enough to taste on the back of my tongue. But underneath it was something else. Him. Wood smoke and cold earth, and something faintly metallic, like blood that had been scrubbed clean, but never really went away. Repeat that. His voice was low, barely above a whisper, but it filled every corner of the room. The kind of voice that didn't need to shout to make you obey. My hands were shaking. I locked my fingers together in front of me, nails biting into my palms hard enough to leave marks. I said I will not marry you, Alpha King. Behind me, someone gasped. One of the councilwomen, probably. They'd dressed me this morning like I was already a bride, layers of cream silk that clung to my ribs and made it hard to breathe. My hair had been braided with gold thread, woven so tight my scalp ached. They'd painted my lips the color of wine, and hung pearls at my throat that felt more like a collar than jewelry. All of it meant to make me beautiful, acceptable, ready to disappear. Because that's what happened to his brides. Everyone knew it, even if no one would say it out loud. Channon stopped 3 feet from me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to meet his eyes. He was tall, broad-shouldered in a way that made the room feel smaller, his dark hair pulled back from a face that would have been handsome if it wasn't so empty. No anger, no surprise, just that same cold, patient study, like I was a puzzle he'd been given time to solve. "Do you know," he said slowly, "what happens to people who refuse me? I imagine the same thing that happens to the women who accept you." The words came out steadier than I felt. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat, behind my eyes, in the pulse point at my wrists. But I kept my chin up, kept my gaze locked on his even as every instinct I had screamed at me to run. Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile. More like recognition. Like I'd said something he didn't expect, but had been waiting a very long time to hear. Interesting. He tilted his head slightly, and the light from the window caught the edge of his jaw, the hard line of his mouth. "You think you know what I am? I know what the last 4 brides became. Nothing. Ghosts. Warnings no one's allowed to speak about." The council stirred behind me. I could feel their panic like heat on my back, could hear the rustle of robes and the shuffle of feet as they edged toward the doors. But no one left. No one dared. Shannon's eyes never left mine. They were dark, nearly black in this light, and they held something I couldn't name. Not rage. Not even cruelty. Something colder than either. Something patient. "And yet you were brought here anyway," he said. "Your pack offered you up like a lamb to slaughter. Your father signed the papers himself. No hesitation. No negotiation. So tell me, Raula," my name on his tongue made my skin prickle. "If you know what I am, why did they send you?" "Because I was expendable. Because my father had 3 daughters and I was the one who asked too many questions. The one who didn't bow fast enough or smile wide enough or pretend hard enough that everything was fine. Because when the Alpha King's envoy arrived at our territory with a marriage decree, my father saw an opportunity to solve 2 problems at once. Secure an alliance and get rid of the daughter who'd stumbled into the one place she wasn't supposed to be. The west wing of our own pack house. The room with the scratches on the inside of the door. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I said, because they thought I'd be too afraid to refuse you. And are you?" He took another step closer. Close enough now that I could see the faint scar that cut through his left eyebrow, the way his pupils dilated slightly when he looked at me. Close enough to smell the coldness on him, like winter pressed into skin. Afraid? Yes. The word came out barely a whisper. Because I was terrified. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to kneel, to apologize, to take it back and beg for mercy. But I'd seen what mercy looked like in this palace. I'd heard the stories. Bride 1, Celine Ashford. Married in spring. Gone by summer. The official story said she'd taken ill, but the servants whispered about the way her rooms had been sealed overnight, about the smell of sage and salt water that leaked under the door for weeks. Bride 2, Kira Thorne. Lasted 3 weeks. Found her wedding ring on the floor of the throne room one morning, still warm. No body. No explanation. Just the ring and a standing order that no one was to enter the North Tower after dark. Bride 3, Marin Cross. She'd tried to run. Made it as far as the forest edge before the guards dragged her back. No one saw her after that, but at night, people swore they could hear crying from the locked wing. High and thin and desperate, like an animal caught in a trap. Bride 4, Isla Greymont. She'd gone willingly. Smiled at the altar. Kissed him like she meant it. 2 weeks later, her rooms were empty. Her clothes still in the wardrobe. Her shoes still by the bed. But Isla was gone. And now they wanted me to be bride 5. Good, Channon said, and the word sent ice down my spine. Fear means you're paying attention. He turned then, not away from me but toward the council, toward the cluster of elders and advisors who'd been watching this entire exchange like it was a play they couldn't pause. His voice, when he spoke again, carried a different weight. The weight of command. Clear the room. Alpha King. One of the councilmen started, a gray-haired man with nervous hands and a voice that shook. The decree hasn't been. Now. It wasn't a shout. It didn't need to be. The single word cracked through the air like a whip, and suddenly everyone was moving. Robes rustling, boots scraping stone, the heavy doors groaning open and then closed again with a boom that echoed in my chest. And then it was just us. Me and the Alpha King and the dying light and the smell of rain that still hadn't come. My breathing was too loud in the sudden silence. Too fast. I tried to slow it, tried to pull air into my lungs in steady counts, but my body wouldn't cooperate. Fight or flight had kicked in, adrenaline flooding hot and sharp through my veins, and I had nowhere to run. Channon moved to the window, put his back to me, stared out at the darkening sky with his hands clasped behind him, and for a moment, just a moment, he looked almost human. Tired. Like the weight of whatever he was carrying had finally bent him at the spine. Tell me what you think you know, he said quietly. About the brides. I swallowed hard. My throat felt like sandpaper. I know they all disappeared. I know no one will talk about what happened to them. And I know there's a wing of this palace that's been locked since before the first one vanished. The West Wing. Yes. And you think I killed them? I think something did. He turned then, and the look on his face stole whatever courage I'd been clinging to. Not anger. Not defensiveness. Just a deep, bone-deep exhaustion that made him look older than he was. Ancient even. Like he'd lived 100 lives and hated every one of them. You're right to refuse me, he said. You're right to be afraid. And you're right that marrying me is a death sentence. He crossed the space between us in 3 strides, and suddenly his hand was on my chin, tilting my face up to his, forcing me to meet his eyes. His touch was cold, gentle, terrifying in its steadiness. But you're wrong about one thing, Raula. What? The word came out strangled. You think refusing me will save you. His thumb brushed my jaw, a whisper of contact that made my breath catch. It won't. Because the moment you walked into this room, the moment you said my name and looked me in the eye like you had any right to, you became exactly what I've been searching for. My heart stopped. What? The only one brave enough, or foolish enough, to see me for what I really am. His hand dropped from my face, but he didn't step back. Didn't give me space. And now that I've found you, I'm not letting you leave. The rain started then. All at once, like the sky had been cut open, water hammering against the windows in sheets. Thunder rolled in the distance, low and threatening, and somewhere deep in the palace something howled. Not a wolf. Not quite human either. Something in between. Channon's jaw tightened. You wanted to know about the West Wing. About what happened to the others. He finally stepped back, moved toward the throne room doors, and pulled them open. In the hallway beyond, 2 guards stood at attention, their faces carefully blank. Then I'll show you. But once you see it, there's no going back. No pretending you don't know. No running. He looked over his shoulder at me, and in the half-light, his eyes caught the reflection of the storm outside. Dark and wild and desperate. Choose carefully. I should have said no. Should have demanded he let me go, Send me back to my pack. Let me disappear into obscurity where I'd be forgotten and safe. But the thing about fear is that sometimes it sharpens you instead of dulling you. Sometimes it makes you see clearer. And what I saw, standing in that throne room with the rain battering the windows and the Alpha King watching me like I held the answer to a question he'd been asking for years, was simple. I was going to die here one way or another. I could die running, die hiding, die pretending I didn't see what everyone else refused to look at. Or I could die knowing the truth. I straightened my spine, smoothed my hands over the silk dress that suddenly felt more like armor than a shroud. And I walked toward him. Show me. Something flickered across his face. Relief, maybe. Or resignation. He nodded once, then turned and strode into the hallway, and I followed him deeper into the palace, into the shadows, toward the locked wing where 4 women had vanished and something that wasn't quite human still howled in the dark. The guards didn't follow us. No one did. And when Channon stopped in front of a door at the end of a corridor I'd never seen before, a door made of iron with symbols carved into it that hurt to look at directly, he pulled a key from his pocket that looked older than the palace itself. Last chance, he said without looking at me. But I was already reaching for the handle. He unlocked it. The door swung open on silent hinges. And on the other side, in a room lit by candles that burned without melting, I saw them. All 4 brides. Alive. Breathing. Staring at me with eyes that glowed faint silver in the dark. And behind them, chained to the wall with iron that sang with old magic, was something else. Something with Channon's face but wrong, twisted, its mouth full of too many teeth, and its eyes burning red. The thing smiled at me, and Channon whispered, "Welcome to the family, Raula. Now we can finally begin." Chapter 2, The Thing Behind the Iron. I couldn't breathe. The air in the room was thick, heavy with something that tasted like copper and smoke, and my lungs refused to pull it in. My eyes darted between the 4 women standing in a semicircle around the edges of the chamber, and the thing chained to the far wall. The thing that wore Shannon's face like a mask that didn't quite fit. Celine Ashford spoke first. Her voice was softer than I expected, almost kind. "Close your mouth, girl. You're letting the cold in." There was no cold. The room was warm, unnaturally so, heated by candles that lined every surface and cast dancing shadows that moved wrong, that seemed to reach toward me with fingers I couldn't quite see. But I snapped my jaw shut anyway, teeth clicking together hard enough to hurt. Channon stepped into the room behind me. I heard the door close, heard the lock turn with a finality that made my stomach drop. When I spun to face him, he was leaning against the iron door, arms crossed, watching me with that same patient expression. Like he had all the time in the world. Like this was exactly what he'd expected. "What is this?" My voice came out hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "What are you?" "The question," said a woman I recognized from the portraits in the great hall as Kira Thorne, "is what is he?" She gestured toward the thing on the wall, and I forced myself to look at it again. It was shaped like a man. Tall, broad-shouldered, with Shannon's dark hair and strong jaw. But the resemblance ended there. Its skin was too pale, almost translucent, showing veins that pulsed black beneath the surface. Its hands were tipped with claws that scraped against the stone wall when it moved, and its mouth, God, its mouth was wrong. Too wide. Too full of teeth that were too sharp and too many, row after row of them disappearing back into a throat that looked deep enough to swallow the world. But it was the eyes that made bile rise in my throat. Red, glowing like embers in a dying fire, fixed on me with an intelligence that felt ancient and hungry and utterly inhuman. "Hello, little bride." The thing's voice was Shannon's but distorted, layered with something that sounded like grinding stone and breaking glass. "Come closer. Let me see you." "Don't." Shannon's command was sharp, and I realized with a jolt that I'd taken a step forward without meaning to. My feet had moved on their own, drawn by something in that voice, something that hooked into my chest and pulled. I stumbled back, crashed into someone. Hands steadied me, Marin Cross, her grip firm and warm and blessedly human. She was smaller than me, delicate-looking with copper hair that fell in waves around her face, but there was steel in her eyes when she met my gaze. "It speaks with his voice," she said quietly. "Uses his memories. Knows things only he should know. But it's not him. Remember that." "Then what is it?" "His shadow." This from Isla Greymont, the most recent bride before me. She was tall and willowy, with skin the color of deep bronze and hair she'd cut short, jagged at the edges like she'd done it herself with a dull blade. She looked tired. They all did. Dark circles under their eyes, a tightness around their mouths that spoke of sleepless nights and constant vigilance. His curse, his twin, depends on who you ask. I looked at Channon. He hadn't moved from the door, but something in his posture had changed. His shoulders were tense, his jaw tight, and he was staring at the thing on the wall with an expression I couldn't read. Hatred, maybe. Or fear. Or something worse than either. Explain, I said. Not a request. A demand. Because if I was going to die here, if I was going to be trapped in this room with whatever that thing was, I deserved to know why. Channon was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the storm raged on, rain hammering against windows I couldn't see, thunder rolling through the palace foundations. When he finally spoke, his voice was flat, empty of everything except exhaustion. When I was born, so was he. 2 souls, 1 body. Mine in the light, his in the dark. For years, we shared this skin, taking turns trading control like children trading toys. But he was never a child. He was hunger. Rage. Everything brutal and violent that lives in the heart of what we are as wolves, concentrated and given form. The thing on the wall laughed. The sound scraped against my ears made my teeth ache. Such poetry, brother. Tell her the rest. Tell her about the first time you let me out to play. Shut up. Channon's voice was deadly quiet. Tell her about the village. The screaming. The way you begged me to stop and how I didn't, how I couldn't, because that's not what I was made for. The thing shifted against its chains, and the iron sang, a high clear note that vibrated in my bones. Tell her how many died before they finally figured out how to cage me. 47. Celine's voice cut through the tension like a knife. She moved to stand beside Channon, and there was something protective in the gesture, something that made me reassess everything I thought I knew. 47 people died in one night, because this thing got loose. Men, women, children. It didn't discriminate, didn't stop. And when it was finally contained, when the witch they'd summoned managed to separate them and bind the shadow here, they made a rule. Kira picked up the thread. That the Alpha King must marry. Must bind himself to someone who can help keep the separation strong. Who can anchor him to his humanity when the pull toward the shadow gets too strong. But it's not that simple, Marin added, and her voice had gone soft, sad. Because the shadow wants out, wants to merge back with Channon, to make them whole again. And it's strong. Stronger than any chain, any spell, any magic we've found. The only thing that keeps it here is sacrifice. Isla's word dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. The shadow feeds on fear, on despair, on the slow erosion of hope. And a bride trapped here, terrified, watching it day after day, that sustains it. Keeps it satisfied enough that it doesn't break free. My stomach turned. You're telling me the other brides weren't killed. They were food. In a manner of speaking. Channon pushed off from the door, and I noticed for the first time how carefully he moved, how he kept his distance from the shadow, from the chains, from everything. Like he was afraid that getting too close would undo whatever magic kept them apart. The witch who bound us said the shadow could never be destroyed. Only contained. Only fed. And the price of containment was someone to bear witness to it. To feel the weight of what it was, what it wanted to do. To live in fear of it every day. That's insane. The words burst out of me, sharp and angry. You've been torturing women to keep that thing locked up? Making them live in terror just so it doesn't eat them? Yes. No hesitation. No apology. Just brutal honesty. For 80 years, that's exactly what we've done. 4 women, one after another, trapped in this room. And every one of them has hated me for it. Every one of them has had the right to. Then why am I here? I was shaking now, rage and fear warring in my chest. Why bring me to this place if you knew? Because you said no. Celine moved closer, and in the candlelight I could see the gray in her hair, the lines around her eyes. She was older than she looked in the portraits. Decades older. Every other bride came here willing, or at least resigned. Afraid, yes. But they still said the vows. Still walked into the cage. You didn't. Kira smiled, and there was something fierce in it. You looked him in the eye and refused. And that changes everything. I looked at Channon, searching for answers in that carefully blank expression. How? The curse is tied to submission. His words came slowly, like he was working through a problem he'd been stuck on for years. To the bride's acceptance of her fate. Every woman who came before agreed to marry me, agreed to be bound to this place, this purpose. And in that agreement they gave the shadow power. Their fear sustained it. Their despair fed it. Their resignation kept it strong. The thing on the wall snarled. For the first time it sounded angry. Lies. Pretty lies to make yourself feel better about what you've done. But you refused me, Channon continued, ignoring the shadow. You stood in front of the entire council and said no. You broke the pattern. And when I brought you here anyway, when I showed you this without your consent to marriage, without the binding ceremony, I think I might have found a loophole. A loophole. I said the word slowly, tasting it. In a curse. Curses have rules, Marin said. They're magic, yes, but they're also contracts. And contracts can be broken if you find the right crack. You're saying that because I refused, I'm not bound the way they were. We're saying, Isla said carefully, that you might be the first bride who has a choice. The first one who can walk away. My heart hammered against my ribs. Then let me go. Open the door and let me leave. Silence. The four women exchanged glances, something passing between them that I couldn't read. And Channon looked at me with an expression that might have been hope if it wasn't so thoroughly buried under resignation. There's a problem, Celine said finally. The shadow is getting stronger. The bindings are weakening. Another 5, maybe 10 years, and they'll fail completely. And when that happens, he'll merge with me again, Channon finished. And this time, I won't be able to stop him. He'll have 80 years of hunger, 80 years of rage, and he'll tear through this kingdom and every kingdom beyond it until there's nothing left. The shadow smiled its too wide smile. Finally, truth. So we need to break the curse. Kira's voice was urgent now. Completely. Not just contain it, but end it. Destroy the shadow for good. And you think I can do that? I couldn't keep the disbelief out of my voice. I'm nobody. I don't have magic. I don't have power. I'm just. You're the variable. Channon took a step toward me, and I saw something in his eyes I hadn't seen before. Desperation. Every other bride was chosen by the council. Political alliances, strategic marriages, women who fit a profile. But you, your father sent you to get rid of you. You weren't supposed to be brave. You weren't supposed to refuse. You were supposed to be easy to break. Thanks for that. But you're not broken. Another step. Close enough now that I could see the pulse beating in his throat, could smell the wood smoke and cold earth scent of him. You're angry. You're terrified. But you're still standing. Still fighting. And that's what we need. Someone who won't submit. Someone who'll look at the shadow and refuse to give it what it wants. You want me to starve it. Understanding crashed over me like the rain battering the windows. You want me to stay here and refuse to be afraid. We want you to help us find another way. Marin's hand was on my shoulder, warm and steady. The witch who cast the curse is long dead. Her grimoire was destroyed in a fire 30 years ago. But there are fragments, pieces of knowledge scattered across the kingdom. With time, with research, with someone who isn't bound by the curse. You think we can break it? Isla's eyes were bright. Really break it. But we need someone on the outside. Someone who can move freely, search for answers, find the missing pieces. And we need someone in here who won't feed the shadow while we work. I looked at each of them in turn. For women who should have been dead. For women who'd been trapped here for decades, living in the shadow of a monster, surviving on hope and stubbornness and each other. For women who were asking me to join them not as a victim, but as an ally. And if I say no? I asked quietly. If I walk out that door right now and never look back? Channon's jaw tightened. Then in 10 years, maybe less, the shadow breaks free. And everyone you've ever loved dies screaming. Including you. But it would be your choice, Celine added. That matters. Even if the outcome is the same, the choice matters. The candles flickered. The shadow watched me with its burning red eyes, and I could feel its attention like a physical weight, pressing down on my shoulders, trying to crush me into submission. It wanted me to run, wanted me to break, wanted me to give it exactly what every other bride had given it. Fear that would feed it, despair that would sustain it, until it was strong enough to devour the world. I thought about my father, signing the marriage decree without hesitation. I thought about my sisters, who'd looked relieved when the envoy came for me. I thought about the west wing of my own pack house, about the scratches on the inside of the door and the questions I'd asked that no one would answer. I thought about the girls who would come after me if I left, the women who would be chosen and brought here and broken, one after another, until the shadow finally won. And I thought about the look in Channon's eyes when I'd refused him in the throne room. That flash of recognition, of relief, like he'd been waiting his entire life for someone to see him and say no anyway. If I stay, I said slowly, I'm not doing it as your bride. I'm not doing it because of some decree or some council decision. I'm doing it because I choose to. Because this is my fight now as much as it's yours. Something shifted in the room. The air felt lighter, clearer, like a window had been opened somewhere. The candles burned brighter. And the shadow hissed, recoiling against its chains like I'd struck it. Channon stared at me. You're staying. I'm staying. But on my terms. I want answers. I want to know everything about this curse, about the witch who cast it, about every failed attempt you've made to break it. And I want access to everywhere in this palace. No locked doors. No secrets. Done. And when we break this curse, not if you let all of us go. All 5 of us. No more brides. No more sacrifices. No more women trapped in the dark because men are too afraid to face their own monsters. For the first time since I'd met him, Channon smiled. It was small, barely there, but it was real. Deal. I turned to face the shadow. It was still watching me, but the hunger in its eyes had changed to something else. Something that might have been respect if it wasn't so thoroughly mixed with hatred. You made a mistake, I told it. Showing me this place. Showing me them. Because now I know you're not invincible. You're just a parasite. And parasites can be removed. The shadow lunged forward, chains snapping taut, its roar shaking dust from the ceiling. But the iron held. The magic held. And I didn't flinch. Behind me, I heard Isla laugh. Oh, I like her. Welcome to the family, Celine said, and this time the words didn't sound like a threat. They sounded like a promise. Chapter 3, The Price of Defiance. The first thing they taught me was how to sleep with one eye open. Not literally, though Marin claimed she'd mastered it after the first year, but close enough. The shadow didn't need rest. Didn't need food or water, or any of the things that made us human. It just watched, hour after hour, day after day, waiting for a moment of weakness, a crack in our resolve it could wedge itself into. It'll try to get into your head, Kira warned me on my second night in the West Wing. She was braiding my hair, her fingers quick and sure, weaving it tight against my skull. Use your fears against you. Show you things that aren't real but feel real enough to break you. I sat on the floor of what had become my corner of the room, a space near the eastern wall where I could see both the door and the shadow without having to turn my head. The others had carved out their own territories over the years. Celine near the window, Isla by the bookshelf, Marin close to the fireplace that burned without needing wood, Kira somewhere in between all of them like a bridge. What kinds of things? I asked, even though part of me didn't want to know. Depends on what scares you most. Kira's hands paused for a moment. For me, it was my daughter. She was 3 when I came here. The shadow showed me her growing up without me. Showed me her forgetting my face, calling another woman mother, learning to hate me for abandoning her. Her voice went soft, distant. It took me months to realize those visions weren't real. That time moves differently in here. That maybe, just maybe, she was still 3 years old out there, still waiting for me to come home. My throat tightened. Is she? I don't know. It's been 80 years in this room, but Channon says only 4 have passed outside. Something about the magic that separates the shadow from the world. Something about how it bends time to keep us fresh, keep our fear potent. She resumed braiding, her touch gentle despite the hardness in her words. So maybe my daughter is 7 now. Maybe she still remembers me. Or maybe the shadow was telling the truth all along, and she's dust in a grave somewhere, having lived and died while I stayed young in this cage. I couldn't find the word. Cruel seemed too small. Monstrous too broad. That's the curse, Kira finished. It doesn't just trap your body. It traps your hope. Makes you question everything. Makes you wonder if fighting is even worth it when you don't know what you're fighting for anymore. From across the room, Celine looked up from the ancient book she'd been studying. Her reading glasses, conjured by whatever magic sustained this place, caught the candlelight. Don't let her scare you too badly, Raula. Yes, the shadow is insidious. Yes, it will try to break you. But you have something the rest of us didn't when we first arrived. What's that? Us. Isla spoke from her position near the door, where she'd been tracing symbols onto the iron with chalk that glowed faintly blue. She was trying to reinforce the bindings, something they did every few days to buy themselves more time. When I came here, Marin had already been alone for 20 years. When Marin arrived, Kira and Celine had only had each other for 15. We were broken in isolation, pieced back together slowly. But you walked into a family. The word family settled strange in my chest. I'd had a family once, father, sisters, a pack that should have protected me. But they'd traded me away like currency, like I was worth less than an alliance with a monster. These women, though, these strangers who'd been brides before me, they'd spent the last 3 nights teaching me the shadow's patterns, showing me the safe corners of the room, sharing what little food appeared on the table each morning, as if by magic. They'd given me more in 3 days than my blood had given me in 20 years. Tell me what you know about breaking the curse, I said, changing the subject before the emotion could choke me. Everything. Don't leave anything out. Celine closed her book with a soft thud. There's not much to tell. The witch who created the binding, her name was Cordelia Ashthorne, died 60 years ago. Her grimoire was supposedly lost in a fire that consumed her tower, and with it, any detailed information about how the curse works or how to undo it. Supposedly? I caught the emphasis. Witches don't trust paper alone. Marin rose from her spot by the fireplace, moved to where a trunk sat against the wall. She opened it, pulled out a stack of letters tied with black ribbon. They hide their knowledge in pieces. A spell here, a ritual there, fragments scattered across people and places, so that even if one piece is lost, others remain. Cordelia had 3 apprentices, Kira continued. Sisters. Talented but reckless, from what the records say. When she died, they scattered. One went north to the Frostvale Pack. One south to the Ember Territories. The third, she hesitated, glanced at Celine. The third stayed here, Celine said quietly. In the capital. Working in secret, trying to find a way to undo what her teacher had done. And, I leaned forward. Did she succeed? We don't know. She disappeared 30 years ago. No body. No note. Just gone. Celine's expression was grim. But before she vanished, she left something behind. A letter, addressed to whoever would come after her. To whoever would still be searching for the silent wing, I repeated. What is that? We don't know, Kira admitted. We've searched every wing of the palace. The North Tower, the South Galleries, the Eastern Barracks. Nothing. Either it's a name that's been lost to time, or it's not in the palace at all, Celine finished. It could be a location in the capital. A landmark. A code for something else entirely. Without more context, we're blind. Frustration simmered under my skin. Then we need more context. More letters. More clues. I looked up at them. You said I'd have access to the whole palace. That I could search for answers. So let me out of this room and let me search. It's not that simple. Shannon's voice cut through the conversation like a blade, and I realized he'd been standing in the doorway the entire time. How long had he been there? How much had he heard? He looked different than he had in the throne room. Tired. His hair was loose around his face, and he'd traded the formal robes for simple clothes, dark pants, a shirt that hung open at the collar. He looked younger like this. More human. But his eyes still held that same careful distance, like he was afraid of getting too close to anything, even his own emotions. The shadow's bindings are weakening, he continued, stepping into the room. The door closed behind him but didn't lock. A courtesy, I realized. A reminder that I could leave if I wanted to. If you're out there searching while I'm in here, it'll have only me to focus on. And I'm not strong enough to resist it alone. Not anymore. You're the Alpha King, I said. You're supposed to be the strongest wolf alive. Physically, maybe. But this, he gestured to the shadow, which had been eerily quiet throughout our entire conversation. This isn't about physical strength. It's about will. About the ability to hold yourself separate from the thing that shares your soul. And after 80 years of fighting it, I'm tired, Raula. So tired I can feel it in my bones. The shadow stirred. Poor Shannon. Always the victim. Tell her the truth, brother. Tell her what happens when you get too tired. Shut up, Shannon said, but there was no heat in it. Just resignation. Tell her about the servant girl. The one who brought you breakfast last month. Shannon's jaw tightened. You don't remember, do you? The shadow's voice was silk over razors. You lost time. 3 hours gone. And when you came back to yourself, there was blood under your fingernails and the girl was missing. They found her in the gardens, alive but broken, with no memory of what happened except your face above hers and your hands around her throat. Ice flooded my veins. You didn't. I didn't, Shannon said quickly. But I might have. The shadow, when the separation weakens, sometimes it can push through. Take control for minutes, sometimes hours. I don't remember what it does during those times. Don't remember anything except the sick feeling when I come back to myself and realize I've lost time again. He's getting stronger, Celine said quietly. The shadow. And Shannon's getting weaker. The balance is tipping. Which is why we need to break the curse now. Isla's voice was sharp with urgency. Not in 10 years. Not in 5. Now, before the shadow takes him completely. But how? I stood, the letter still clutched in my hand. We don't know where the silent wing is. We don't know what the other apprentices found. We don't even know if breaking the curse is possible or if we're just I stopped, swallowed the words chasing smoke. Say it, Marin urged. If we're just giving ourselves hope so we don't go insane. The truth hung in the air like the sword of Damocles, sharp and terrible and impossible to ignore. There's one way to find out, Kira said slowly. One of the apprentices is still alive. The one who went north to the Frostvale pack. How do you know? Channon asked, and there was something desperate in his voice now, something raw. Because I'm from Frostvale. Kira moved to the window, stared out at the darkness beyond. And before I was brought here, there were stories. About an old woman who lived at the edge of the territory. A witch who never aged, who spoke in riddles and traded in secrets. The pack elders said she was mad. That she'd lost her mind trying to solve a problem that had no solution. You think that's Cordelia's apprentice? I think it's worth finding out. Kira turned back to us. But Frostvale is 3 days' ride from here. And I can't leave. None of us can. The curse binds us to this room as surely as it binds the shadow. But I can. The realization hit me like lightning. I'm not bound. I never said the vows. I never accepted the marriage. I can leave. You can't go alone, Channon said immediately. The roads between here and Frostvale are dangerous. Rogue wolves, bandits, worse things that hunt at night. Then come with me. He stared at me like I'd suggested we fly to the moon. I can't leave the palace. If I'm too far from the shadow for too long, the separation starts to break down. I'll lose myself. Become the very thing we're trying to prevent. How long is too long? He hesitated. A day. Maybe less. Then we have a day. I straightened my shoulders, met his eyes with a determination I didn't entirely feel. Frostvale is 3 days by horse, but wolves can run faster. If we leave at dawn, push hard, we might make it there by nightfall. Talk to the witch. Get whatever information she has. And be back before you lose yourself. That's insane, Isla said, but she was smiling. It's dangerous and reckless, and you'll probably die. So would you do it? In a heartbeat. Channon looked at each of the women in turn, and something passed between them. A silent conversation, years of shared captivity condensed into glances and nods. Finally, he turned back to me. If we do this, if I agree to this, you have to promise me something. What? If I start to turn. If the shadow starts to take over, and I can't stop it. You run. You don't try to save me. You don't try to fight me. You run as fast and as far as you can, and you don't look back. I wanted to argue. Wanted to tell him that I wouldn't leave him to become a monster. But I saw the fear in his eyes, the same fear I'd seen in the throne room when he'd looked at the shadow. This wasn't bravado or martyrdom. This was a man who knew exactly what he was capable of becoming, and who was more terrified of that than he was of dying. I promise, I lied. He knew it was a lie. I could see it in the way his mouth tightened, the way his shoulders tensed. But he didn't call me on it. Maybe because he wanted to believe it. Or maybe because he understood that sometimes lies are kinder than the truth. Dawn then, he said. We leave at dawn. The shadow laughed. Low and cruel and anticipating. This should be entertaining. I didn't sleep that night. None of us did. We spent the hours before dawn preparing. Celine going over maps. Marin packing supplies in a bag that shouldn't have fit everything she put in it. Isla drawing protective symbols on my skin with the same glowing chalk she used on the doors. They worked in quiet efficiency, a well-oiled machine born of decades trapped together. Kira sat with me, teaching me the route to her old territory, describing landmarks I'd need to recognize in the dark. The witch lives in a cottage at the base of the northern mountain. You'll know it because there are wind chimes made of bones hanging from the trees. Don't touch them. Don't even look at them too long. They're not decoration. What are they? A test. If you can pass them without reacting, she'll speak to you. If you can't, Kira shrugged. Well, let's hope you can. Channon returned just before dawn with clothes for me. Pants, a tunic, boots that fit better than they should have. Can't have you running through the forest in a wedding dress, he said, and there was something almost like humor in his voice. I changed quickly, grateful to be out of the silk that had been clinging to me for days. The new clothes felt like armor. Like I was putting on a version of myself that could do this impossible thing. When I emerged from behind the screen they'd set up for privacy, all 5 of them were watching me. Waiting. Last chance to back out, Celine said. Not a chance. Channon held out his hand. Then let's go find some answers. I took it. His palm was calloused, warm despite the coldness that always seemed to cling to him. And as we walked toward the door, toward the dawn and the danger and the desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, we could actually break this curse, I heard the shadow's voice one last time. Run fast, little bride. But not too fast. I want you to feel it when I catch you. The door closed behind us. The lock turned. And in the growing light of morning, Channon and I ran toward the forest, toward Frostvale, toward a witch who might have the answers we needed. Or toward our deaths. At this point, I honestly wasn't sure which was more likely. Chapter 4. The Breaking. The forest smelled like wet earth and pine needles, sharp and clean in a way that made my lungs ache. We'd been running for hours, Channon and I, our wolves pushing through the undergrowth in a rhythm that felt older than words. His wolf was massive, black as midnight with eyes that glowed amber in the shadows, and mine was smaller, leaner, rust-colored fur streaked with white along my spine. We moved like water through the trees, like we'd been running together for years instead of hours. But I could feel the wrongness creeping into him. It started small. A hesitation in his stride. A growl that came from nowhere, directed at nothing. Then his eyes would flash red for just a moment before bleeding back to amber, and I'd see him shake his head like he was trying to dislodge something clinging to the inside of his skull. The shadow was reaching for him across the distance, trying to pull him back, trying to merge. We shifted back to human form at midday, panting and exhausted, our clothes, carried in our mouths, damp with sweat and morning dew. Channon leaned against a tree, his chest heaving, and I saw his hands trembling. How much further? His voice was strained. I checked the position of the sun, tried to remember Kira's directions. 3, maybe 4 hours if we keep this pace. I don't have 4 hours. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, there was red bleeding through the amber. Raula, I can feel him. Feel it. It's like hooks in my mind, pulling me back, pulling me under. If we don't. He stopped. His body went rigid. And when he looked at me again, the red had consumed the amber entirely. Run, he said, but it wasn't his voice anymore. It was layered, distorted, the shadow speaking through him. Run, little bride, before I... He lunged. I threw myself sideways, hit the ground hard enough to knock the air from my lungs. Shifted mid-roll, my wolf surging forward with a snarl that was more fear than aggression. Shannon's wolf crashed into the space where I'd been, all teeth and claws and killing intent, and I realized with horrible clarity that he wasn't pulling his punches. The shadow had him completely. This wasn't a man trying not to hurt me. This was a predator trying to end me. I ran. Through the trees, over fallen logs, splashing through a creek that soaked my fur and made my paws slip on the stones. Behind me, I could hear him. Heavy footfalls, breathing that sounded more like growling, the snap of branches as he tore through obstacles I'd dodged around. He was faster than me. Stronger. And he was gaining. A voice in my head screamed at me to keep running, to put as much distance between us as possible, to break my promise and save myself. But another voice, quieter, steadier, reminded me of the look in his eyes when he'd asked me to promise. The fear. The resignation. The certainty that this was how it would end. No. I skidded to a stop in a clearing, shifted back to human, and turned to face him. Shannon's wolf burst through the tree line 3 seconds later, and the sight of him stole my breath. His fur was standing on end, his lips pulled back from teeth that looked too sharp, too many. Red eyes fixed on me with an intelligence that was ancient and hungry and absolutely inhuman. This was the shadow wearing Shannon's skin, the thing that had killed 47 people in a single night. And I was about to bet everything that somewhere underneath it, Channon was still fighting. I know you're in there, I said, my voice steady despite the terror clawing at my throat. I know you can hear me, Channon. And I know you think you've lost. That the shadows won. But you're wrong. The wolf took a step forward, growled low and threatening. You've been fighting this thing alone for 80 years. Carrying the weight of it by yourself, because you thought that's what strength meant. That's what being an alpha meant. But that's not strength. That's just stubbornness. And it's exactly what the shadow wants, for you to be isolated, separated from everyone who could help you, convinced that you're a monster who has to face his demons alone. Another step. Close enough now that I could see the saliva dripping from his jaws, could smell the wrongness radiating off him like heat from a forge. But you're not alone anymore. You have Celine, Kira, Marinisla. You have 4 women who've spent decades learning how this curse works, how to resist it, how to survive it. And now you have me. Someone who looked at the worst thing about you and decided to stay anyway. Not because I'm not afraid, but because being afraid doesn't mean being helpless. The wolf lunged. I didn't move. His jaws closed around my throat, gentle, so gentle it barely bruised. And then he froze. I felt the moment Channon took back control. Felt the red bleed out of his eyes. felt his body shudder as he fought the shadow back down into whatever dark corner of his soul it had crawled out from. He released me, stumbled backward, and shifted so violently it looked painful. He collapsed to his knees in the grass, naked and shaking, and when he looked up at me there were tears streaming down his face. You didn't run. I promised I would. But I also promised those women I'd help break this curse. Can't do that if you're dead. He laughed, but it came out more like a sob. You're insane. So I've been told. I moved to him, knelt in the grass beside him, and took his face in my hands. His skin was cold, clammy with sweat, but he was here. Present. Himself. How long do we have? Not long. An hour. Maybe less before it tries again. Then we move fast. I helped him dress, and we shifted back to wolf form. But this time I stayed close. Close enough that our fur brushed as we ran. Close enough that I could feel his heartbeat through the rhythm of our paws hitting the ground. And every time I felt him start to slip, felt the wrongness creeping back into his movements, I'd nip at his shoulder or press against his side, a physical reminder that he wasn't alone. We reached Frostvale territory as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The cottage appeared exactly as Kira had described, small, weathered, surrounded by trees that were hung with wind chimes made of bones. They swayed in the breeze, clicking and clattering, and I felt their attention like eyes on my skin. Testing. Judging. I kept my gaze forward, kept my breathing steady, and walked past them without flinching. Behind me, I heard Channon do the same. The door opened before we could knock. The woman standing in the threshold was ancient. Skin like weathered leather, hair so white it was almost translucent, eyes that were milky with cataracts. But when she smiled, her teeth were perfect, and there was something ageless in her expression. Something that had seen empires rise and fall, and hadn't been impressed by either. Took you long enough, she said, her voice surprisingly strong. Kira sent word you'd be coming. Well, not word exactly. More like a dream. A very insistent dream that involved her threatening to haunt me if I didn't help you. She stepped aside, gestured for us to enter. Come in before the boy loses himself entirely. I can smell the shadow on him from here. The cottage was larger inside than it had any right to be. The walls lined with shelves that groaned under the weight of books and bottles, and things I couldn't identify in jars. A fire burned in the hearth despite the warmth of the day, and herbs hung drying from the rafters, filling the air with a scent that was both medicinal and faintly threatening. Sit, the witch commanded, pointing to a table that was covered in papers. And tell me what you know about the curse. I did. Quickly, efficiently, covering everything the women had told me, everything we'd pieced together about Cordelia Ashthorne and her apprentices and the fragments of knowledge scattered across the kingdom. The witch listened without interrupting, her blind eyes fixed on something beyond the walls, beyond the visible world. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached for one of the books on the shelf, flipped it open to a page that was marked with a black ribbon, and pushed it toward me. The curse Cordelia created wasn't meant to be permanent, she said. It was supposed to be a temporary binding while she found a way to destroy the shadow completely. But she died before she could finish the work, and without her, the binding became a prison. For both the shadow and the man. So there is a way to break it, Channon said, and his voice was desperate with hope. There's always a way to break a curse. The question is whether you're willing to pay the price. The witch's milky eyes found him with unnerving accuracy. The shadow isn't separate from you, boy. It's part of you. The violence, the rage, the hunger. Those are all things that live in every wolf's heart. Cordelia's mistake was trying to cut them out instead of helping you integrate them. And when she bound the shadow, she bound those parts of you too. Made you less than whole. Then how do we make him whole without unleashing that thing? I asked. By teaching him to accept it. To acknowledge that the darkness is part of him without letting it control him. She tapped the book with one gnarled finger. The ritual is here. But it requires 3 things, a willing vessel, a tether to humanity, and a sacrifice of blood. What kind of sacrifice? The kind that hurts. She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I had the uncomfortable feeling she could see right through to my bones. You'll have to bind yourself to him. Not as a bride, not as a captive, but as an anchor. Someone who can hold him steady while he faces the shadow and takes it back into himself. And if he can't, if the shadow wins, then you'll die with him. Your souls will be tangled together, and when he falls, you'll fall too. She said it so matter-of-factly, like she was discussing the weather. That's the price. That's always the price. No magic comes for free. I looked at Channon. He was staring at the book like it held all the answers to questions he'd been asking his entire life, but there was terror in his eyes too. The kind of terror that came from having hope after decades of none. "We don't have a choice," I said quietly. "If we don't do this, the shadow breaks free in a few years anyway. This way, at least we're choosing to fight." "Raula, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking. I'm offering." I turned back to the witch. "What do we need to do?" She smiled, and it was the smile of someone who'd seen this story play out 100 times before. "First, we need to get back to the palace. The ritual requires the shadow's physical presence. You need to face the thing where it lives. That'll take 3 days we don't have. Lucky for you, I'm a witch." She stood, moved to the fire, and threw something into it that made the flames roar green. "I can open a door. Get you back in an hour instead of days. But it'll cost you." "What's the cost?" "A memory. Something precious. Something you don't want to lose." Her blind eyes found mine again. But what were memories compared to the chance to save 5 lives? To end a curse that had destroyed dozens of women before me? "Take it," I said. The witch nodded. She moved to me, placed her palm against my forehead, and I felt something tear loose in my mind. A memory, which one I couldn't say because the moment it was gone, I couldn't remember what I'd lost. There was just an empty space where something had been, like a tooth pulled from a gum. "Done." She moved her hand in a complex pattern, and the fire roared higher. Through the flames, I could see stone walls. "The west wing. Go. You have until midnight to complete the ritual. After that, the door closes and you're on your own." Channon grabbed my hand. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet. You might not survive this." But there was something almost gentle in her voice. "If you do, though, if you break the curse and live to tell about it, send Kira home to me. Tell her I've been waiting. Tell her time moves differently everywhere, and her daughter is still young enough to remember her mother's face." Then she pushed us through the fire, and the world dissolved into heat and light and the smell of smoke. We landed in the west wing, sprawling across the stone floor in a tangle of limbs. The 4 women rushed to us immediately, helping us up, checking for injuries, asking questions faster than we could answer them. "Did you find her?" Celine demanded. "Did she have answers?" Marin added. "Are you all right?" Isla's hands were on my face, checking my pupils. "You look different. Did something." "We have answers," I interrupted. "And we have until midnight to use them." I told them everything. The ritual, the requirements, the risks. They listened in silence, and when I finished, they exchanged glances that held entire conversations I wasn't privy to. "You'll do it," Kira said finally. Not a question. A statement. "We'll do it," I corrected, looking at Channon. He nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Then we'd better get started." Celine moved to the trunk, pulled out chalk and candles and a knife that looked older than the palace. "The ritual requires a circle, symbols drawn in your blood, and words spoken in a language that predates packs, predates alphas, predates everything we know about what we are." "I know it," Marin said quietly. "Cordelia taught it to me. Before," she stopped, swallowed. "Before everything went wrong. I still remember. We worked quickly. Drew the circle around the shadow's chains, using my blood and Shannon's to paint symbols that made my eyes water when I looked at them too long. The shadow watched us work, and for the first time since I'd met it, it looked uncertain. Almost afraid. "What are you doing?" it demanded. "What is this?" "Taking you back," Channon said. "You're part of me. You always have been. And I'm done being afraid of you. You can't." The shadow's voice was panicked now, frantic. "If we merge, if you take me back, you'll become the monster. You'll be everything you've spent your life trying not to be. Maybe. Or maybe I'll finally be whole." Channon stepped into the circle, held out his hand to me. "Ready." I took it, stepped into the circle beside him, and nodded. Marin began to chant. The words were old, guttural, spoken in a rhythm that made my bones vibrate. The candles flared, their flames stretching toward the ceiling, and I felt something shift in the air. A tearing like fabric being ripped. The shadow screamed, pulling against its chains, but the iron held. Barely. Shannon's hand tightened on mine. "It's trying to pull free. Trying to run. Don't let it." I squeezed back, hard enough to hurt. "You face it. You take it back. And I'll hold you here. I won't let you fall." He closed his eyes, took a breath, and opened himself to the shadow. I felt the moment the connection snapped into place. Felt the shadow surge through him like a flood, all its rage and hunger and violence crashing into Channon with enough force to drive him to his knees. I went down with him, our hands still locked together, and I could feel it trying to consume him. Could feel him drowning in decades of suppressed fury, of denied nature, of everything he'd cut away to be the alpha everyone needed him to be. Channon. I shook him, but his eyes were rolled back, his body convulsing. You have to fight it. You have to. I'm not fighting it. His voice was strained, barely audible over Marin's chanting. I'm accepting it. All of it. The violence. The hunger. The parts of me I've been afraid to face. He opened his eyes and they were red. Completely, utterly red. But when he looked at me I saw him. Saw Channon looking back through the shadow's eyes. This is who I am. Monster and man. Shadow and light. And I'm done choosing between them. The shadow howled. A sound of pure rage that shook the walls, cracked the stones. But Channon held steady. Held on. And slowly, so slowly, the red began to bleed into amber. Not replacing it. Mixing with it. Creating something new. Something that was both and neither. The chains shattered. The shadow surged forward, no longer a separate entity, but a wave of darkness that crashed into Channon and disappeared. Absorbed. Integrated. Made whole. He screamed. The sound was agony and ecstasy and everything in between. And then he collapsed, pulling me down with him, both of us gasping in the center of a circle that was still glowing faint blue. Is it done? Isla's voice, small and hopeful. Celine moved forward, checked Shannon's pulse, his breathing. Then she looked at me, and there were tears streaming down her face. It's done. The curse is broken. The West Wing doors flew open. Not by magic. By guards who'd heard the commotion and come running. They stopped in the doorway, staring at the scene. 5 women, 2 people collapsed in a ritual circle, and no shadow chained to the wall. Where is it? One of them demanded. Where's the? Gone, Channon said, his voice hoarse but steady. He sat up slowly. Help me do the same. It's gone. And it's not coming back. He looked different. Not physically, though maybe there was something sharper in his features, something more defined in the set of his jaw. But his eyes were amber shot through with threads of red, like embers in dying coals. Human and other. Controlled chaos. Whole. It's really over, Kira whispered. After 80 years, it's really, she couldn't finish. Just dissolved into sobs, and Marin and Isla and Celine gathered around her, holding her while she fell apart with relief. Channon turned to me. You could have died. So could you. But you stayed anyway. I promised, didn't I? I said I wouldn't marry you, but I'd help you break this curse. I keep my promises. I managed a tired smile. Even the ones I shouldn't make. He laughed. Actual, genuine laughter that sounded rusty from disuse. I don't suppose there's any chance you've changed your mind? About the marriage? Not even a little bit. Good. He stood, offered me his hand. Because I'd rather have you as an ally than a bride any day. I took it. Let him pull me to my feet. And together, we faced the guards, the dawn breaking through the windows behind us, and the future we'd fought so hard to claim. 3 months later, I stood in the throne room again. But this time I wasn't alone. Celine was beside me, her gray hair freshly cut, wearing robes that marked her as the new head of the council. Kira was there too, dressed for travel, a pack slung over her shoulder. She was leaving at dawn, going back to Frostvale to find her daughter, to reclaim the life she'd lost. Marin and Isla stood near the windows, arguing cheerfully about some obscure point of magical theory, their voices bright with the freedom to finally pursue knowledge instead of survival. And Channon sat on his throne with the kind of ease he'd never had before. Like he finally fit in his own skin. You're leaving, he said, and it wasn't a question. I am. I'd made the decision weeks ago. The palace was changing, becoming something better under Celine's guidance and Shannon's steadier rule. But it wasn't my place. I had a pact to go back to. Questions to ask my father. A life to reclaim. But I'll visit. Someone has to make sure you don't backslide into old habits. I'd appreciate that. He stood, descended the steps, and stopped in front of me. Thank you, Raula. For refusing me. For staying. For being exactly what I needed when I needed it most. Thank you for being worth saving. He smiled, that small, rare smile that transformed his whole face. Go home. Face your demons. And when you're ready, if you're ever ready, come back. There will always be a place for you here. I nodded. Turned to the women who'd become my family in the span of a few desperate weeks. Hugged each of them tight enough to crack ribs. And then I walked out of the throne room, through the palace, past the West Wing where the door now stood open and empty, and into the morning light. The story of the ruthless Alpha King and the bride who refused him would be told for generations. They'd say I tamed him, that I saved him, That I was the key to breaking an ancient curse. But the truth was simpler. I'd just been the first person to look at him and see not a monster or a king, but a man who needed help. And when he'd reached out, I'd reached back. Sometimes that's all it takes to break a curse. Someone willing to hold on when everyone else lets go. And as I shifted into my wolf and ran toward home, I carried that truth with me like a torch in the dark. Thanks for listening till the end. If you enjoyed this story, tap like, hit subscribe, and don't stop here. There's another story waiting for you. Just click the video on your screen to keep going.